Hartmann here with you. On the line with us, our old friend Professor Richard Wolff. He is an economist. He is the co-founder of Democracy at Work. His most recent book, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website, democracyatwork.info, and of course his personal website, rdwolff with 2fs.com. Well, I'm not sure it's personal. It also, has all that kind of cool stuff on it. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you with us. I found this article this morning on the Huffington Post and wanted to bounce it off you. It's titled Vienna's Affordable Housing Paradise. And basically it talks about how, well, just a quote from it, today anyone earning up to $53,000 a year after taxes is eligible to apply for a subsidized apartment in Vienna. And this is a country where the annual the median gross annual income is only $31,000. So, if you're earning under about twice the average income, you qualify for discounted housing. The average income in the United States is in the 40s, as I recall. So this would be anyone earning under $80,000 would get subsidized housing in the United States. 62% of Vienna's citizens currently live in what they call social housing, compared to 1% of America's population. What does this mean, and what does it mean about how societies can be organized to create middle classes, how it may be that a middle class doesn't just naturally emerge? In fact, in a totally laissez-faire state, you would have very little middle class, that it has to be crafted essentially by government, sir.
Well, it's interesting. I have been to Vienna. I have visited friends and associates who live in the social housing units that they have all over the city. You wouldn't know that you were in public housing. That is, if you come from the United States, your image of public housing is somewhere between horrible and disastrous in most cases. There are a few exceptions, but mostly it's very poor people, and these things are not very well maintained. So when you arrive at the social housing in Vienna, you don't imagine, unless someone explains it to you, that these wonderfully landscaped, spick and span, clean, comfortable, roomy apartments are social housing. So let's inquire. Back in the 1920s, when socialists were the government in Austria, they committed to building mass, quality, public housing. The logic in their minds, which Americans I think can understand, is that housing is as important in its way as education is. So if you're going to create a public school system, rather than letting everybody get to school if they can afford it, if you're going to have a public education system to help build your people and a middle class, etc., then you should do the same for housing. And they never looked back. That's why 60%, as you pointed out, or over 60% live in it. By the way, the average percentage paid for rent by these people is around 25, 26% of their income, which is where economists mostly think a decent portion of your income should go for rent, but not beyond that. And by comparison, across the United States, the percentage is much, much higher. So yes, I think it illustrates beautifully that if you want a society of a middle class, of people who get along with each other, who can live and recreate and have some time off and lead the kind of lives that not only they prefer, but is better for all of those who come in contact with them, then you have to do the kinds of things that Vienna has done. And it has, boy, has it stood the test of time. It's now a 100-year-old experiment, and whether right-wing or left-wing governments have come and gone in Austria, none of them has dared touch this system because it is overwhelmingly supported by the Viennese people.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable stuff. And yet here in the United States, we have billionaire oligarchs who call themselves libertarians, who believe that this is socialism or worse, communism, that it is antithetical to the values of the United States, or at least the values of the billionaire class. They are supported by their fellow billionaire oligarch, Rupert Murdoch, who programs a television network to, with multi-million-dollar stars like Sean Hannity, worth tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and pitch to the average schlub, the average guy in America, the average guy and gal in America, that, hey, you know, the interests of the billionaires are really your interests. You want to see taxes go down on rich people. You want to see an end to public housing. You want to see an end to food stamps. You want to see an end to programs that, you know, like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid that hold the middle class together. You want to see an end to public education, voucherize and privatize everything. And people are buying this, Professor Wolff.
Yes, and that's why a trip, if you could arrange it, Tom, take Americans randomly chosen to Vienna for a week. I guarantee you they have never seen anything like.
Well, this is what Michael Moore did with his movie Where to Invade Next.
That's right. Literally, you could maybe do it in that way with the wonders of the internet and all the rest, just to give people a sense. I noticed in this country, I've heard it many times, and most recently from the Housing Secretary, Carson, that there is a deliberate effort to keep public housing looking the way it usually does and deteriorated the way it usually is, in order not, in their lovely language, to let people become dependent on help from the government in the form of quality housing. The Viennese experiment, now 100 years old, testifies to the extraordinary quality of life. There's an award given every year in Europe for the most livable city. That includes London, Paris, Berlin, you name it. Vienna wins it hands down, I think 9 out of the last 10 years, because, of course, if you have a mass of people who live in a beautiful home and therefore have enough money because of the low rents to maintain the coffee shops and all the other amenities that make living in a place beautiful, you have a completely different quality of life than the kind of gentrification extremes such as those we have here in New York City, where a 10-minute subway ride can take you to the most richest neighborhood in the world, and then 10 minutes later into the worst poverty you can see in the Western Hemisphere. It's just a completely different way of understanding what collective life in a community could and should be.
And yet the response to that you will get from you know, billionaire Murdoch and his Fox network and the multimillionaire broadcasters on that network, or from multimillionaire Rush Limbaugh or these other guys, is well, yeah, of course, you can have everybody have decent housing, but that means that you're going to have to raise my taxes. You're going to steal money from me that I earned with the sweat of my brow and the intellect of my mind, and that is rightfully mine. You're talking about the redistribution of wealth. That, sir, is communism.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and I can understand their hysteria. And I would put it this way. They have to whip up whatever crazy notion they can to tap into whatever they can reach in people not to do or to make an experiment of doing what the Viennese did. And the reason they have to go to these strange lengths with these crazy arguments is that they know what Vienna proves. Once the people understood what you can have in the way of a modern society, nobody would ever get them to go back to what we have in this country now.
Well, and this is true of the, you know, out of the 34 richest countries in the world, the 34 OECD nations, 33 of them, including, you know, Canada on the high end of wealth and Costa Rica at the very bottom, have national health care systems. The only one that doesn't is the United States. And, you know, Canada, Tommy Douglas is revered in Canada the way we think of George Washington. He was the, you know, the politician who started that program in Canada in, what was it, Winnipeg, wherever it was, you know, somewhere out west there back in the 60s and or maybe the 50s. And it's like this, you know, they're not going to go back. It's like, well, I would say Americans, you know, they don't want to go back on Social Security and Medicare.
No, because once you get it and you understand the difference it can make, in the case of Social Security, that old people have a sense they will not be a burden on their children, or at least less of one than they might otherwise have been. And young people understand what a better relationship you can have with your elderly relatives if you're not crowding in on an insufficient economic basis. If you could just extend that awareness to make it clear, imagine a health service where an operation wouldn't be the great catastrophe, or a housing that gave you a nice, comfortable place that would allow you to focus on the other parts of your life rather than desperately worrying about where you'll sleep. It's not just a different house. It's a whole different way of life in which you understand we're going to help each other be an effective community rather than accumulate as much as we can and let the chips fall where they may, even though it looks.
But isn't the price? But the price paid for that, Professor Wolff, is that if somebody in Austria has earned $1 billion and wants to turn it into $5 billion, they're going to find it very difficult. And they may be able to turn it into $1.3 billion or $1.6 billion, but, you know, doubling, tripling the way here in the United States, I mean, we saw the Koch brothers just in the last decade or so go from being worth $10 billion to being worth, what, 80, 90 billion, among others. I mean, and that somehow Americans have it in our heads that billionaires being able to get mind-bogglingly rich, even as the middle class sinks into the mud, is a good thing.
Yeah, they think it until the mud becomes unbearable. Right. You know, Americans are going to have to face that as Mr. Jeffrey Bezos has his $150 billion, which I saw yesterday's headline, of personal wealth, and vast numbers of Americans can't afford to send their kids to get a college education. You're going to see, it'll take time, but you're going to see a recognition that allowing a handful of people, and that's what we're talking about, to become billionaires, while the vast majority of people are struggling in ways we don't need to have them struggle because we have the resources to take care of everybody. In the end, the democratic impulse of what's good for the majority is more important than what's good for the minority will work its way forward.
From your lips to God's ears, sir. Professor Richard Wolff, his most recent book is Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, and his website, Democracy at Work. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs. Dr. Wolff, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Tom. Talk to you again soon.
Indeed. Good talking with you. We'll be back.